What happens when a disabled man in a small town parking lot becomes the target of ruthless bikers? You won't believe how his quiet phone call turns the tables in the most unexpected way. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Sam's roadside diner in Lincoln, Nebraska. It was the kind of place where the locals gathered for coffee refills and truckers stopped to grab a bite before hitting the highway again. The steady hum of conversations and clinking dishes carried faintly through the open windows. But outside, the atmosphere was about to change. A man in his mid-40s, sitting in a sleek black wheelchair, rolled smoothly into the parking lot. His name was Derek. Dressed in a crisp button-down and faded jeans, he moved with quiet confidence, his gaze fixed ahead. Derek had come to grab a late lunch after running errands, unaware he was about to become the target of unwelcome attention. Across the lot, a group of 5 bikers leaned against their motorcycles. Their laughter echoed, rough and pointed, as one of them elbowed the other, gesturing toward Derek. He was the kind of man who drew attention without asking for it. His dark skin and the wheelchair combined to make him an anomaly in their world. "Hey, Rollin' Thunder," one of them shouted, his voice cutting through the space like a bad joke. The others chuckled, their laughter carrying a mean edge. Derek didn't look their way. He simply continued toward the diner door, focused, calm, and completely unfazed. But the bikers weren't about to let it go. One of them pushed off his bike, a cocky smirk plastered on his face, and started walking toward Derek. The rest followed, their boots crunching against the gravel. Derek slowed his approach, instinctively aware of the group closing in behind him. He stopped near the diner's entrance, his hand hovering over the wheel rim. The leader of the bikers, a burly man with a leather vest and a patch that read "Outlaw Rebels," stepped closer. His grin was anything but friendly. "Hey, buddy," the man called out, his tone dripping with mockery. "Where's the fire? Or you just out for a stroll?" The group behind him erupted in laughter. Derek turned his head slightly, meeting the man's gaze with an expression of calm resolve. "Just grabbing some lunch," he said evenly, his voice steady, controlled, giving nothing away. But his calm only seemed to provoke them further. Another biker, younger and wiry with tattoos snaking up his arms, chimed in. "What's the matter, man? Ain't gonna run us over, are you?" He mimicked a wheeling motion with his hands, earning another round of cruel laughter. Derek didn't reply this time. Instead, he adjusted his position and prepared to wheel past them, clearly uninterested in playing their game. But as he moved, one of the bikers stepped directly into his path, blocking him. "Not so fast," the leader said, his grin fading into something colder. "We're just having a little fun, right? No need to be rude." For a moment, the air felt heavy. A few patrons inside the diner glanced out the windows, but no one dared to intervene. Derek looked at the biker in front of him, then at the others forming a loose semicircle around him. Still, he showed no fear. "I don't want any trouble," Derek said plainly, his voice carrying just enough authority to make the men pause, but it was clear they weren't backing down. Instead of responding, Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His movements were slow, deliberate, but they didn't go unnoticed. The leader's smug expression faltered for just a moment. "Who you calling, huh?" he barked. "Cops ain't gonna do much out here." But Derek's calm demeanor didn't waver. He dialed, put the phone to his ear, and said just a few words before hanging up. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, but they didn't yet realize what was coming. Derek tucked the phone back into his pocket without a word. The leader of the bikers squinted at him, trying to read his expression. "What was that about, huh? You think you're scaring us?" he sneered. But there was an undercurrent of uncertainty in his voice. Derek didn't reply. He didn't need to. Instead, he wheeled his chair a few feet to the side, positioning himself against the wall of the diner, as though he had all the time in the world. His calm composure only fueled their frustration. "What, you got backup coming?" another biker joked, his laugh carrying a nervous edge. The others joined in, but it was forced, hollow. Something about Derek's quiet confidence was starting to eat at them. Minutes passed. The bikers shifted restlessly, their bravado beginning to crack. "Man, I don't like this," one muttered under his breath, but the leader quickly silenced him with a glare. Then it happened. A low, rumbling sound in the distance. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, but it grew louder with every passing second. The unmistakable roar of engines filled the air, cutting through the uneasy quiet of the parking lot. Heads turned toward the main road as a convoy of motorcycles came into view, their chrome glinting under the late afternoon sun. The sight was enough to make the bikers fall silent. The convoy was massive, dozens of riders clad in black leather and helmets, their jackets adorned with patches bearing symbols of unity and protection. They moved as one, their presence commanding attention. Derek watched them approach, his face unreadable. He hadn't said a word since his phone call, but now a faint smile played at the corner of his lips. The convoy pulled into the parking lot with precision, lining up their bikes like soldiers preparing for battle. The leader of the original bikers took a step back, his confidence crumbling as he muttered, "Who the hell are these guys?" But deep down, he already knew the answer. The power dynamic had shifted, and there was no going back. The convoy of riders dismounted their bikes almost in unison, boots hitting the gravel with a steady rhythm. They moved with purpose, no words, no shouting, just a collective presence that was impossible to ignore. Each one carried an air of quiet authority, their leather jackets emblazoned with a patch that read "Guardians of the Road." The leader of the convoy, a tall man with a silver beard and piercing eyes, stepped forward. He scanned the scene quickly, his gaze landing on Derek. "You good, brother?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Derek nodded slightly, his expression still composed. "I am now," he replied. The silver-bearded man turned his attention to the bikers who had been harassing Derek. The group that had moments ago seemed so cocky and untouchable now looked like deer caught in headlights. The leader of the original bikers tried to muster some bravado, puffing out his chest. "What's all this about?" he demanded, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. The Guardian leader took a single step closer, his imposing presence enough to make the man flinch. "This is about respect," he said evenly, his tone carrying the weight of someone who wasn't used to repeating himself. "Something you clearly don't understand." The other Guardians fanned out slightly, forming a protective semicircle around Derek. The original bikers glanced at each other, their confidence draining with each passing second. One of them, the wiry young man with tattoos, muttered, "Man, we didn't mean anything by it. Just messing around, you know." But the Guardian leader wasn't buying it. He folded his arms across his chest and said, "Messing around? Harassing a man in a wheelchair isn't messing around, it's cowardice." The leader's words hit hard, and for the first time the bikers had nothing to say. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of the diner door opening as curious onlookers peeked out to see what was happening. The leader of the original bikers swallowed hard, his earlier smirk now a distant memory. He looked at his crew, hoping for some backup, but their eyes darted away, avoiding his. The Guardians stood firm, their presence overwhelming. Their silence was more intimidating than any threats could have been. Derek finally spoke, his voice calm but cutting through the tension like a knife. "You thought I was alone, didn't you?" He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "That's the thing about people like you. You only pick on those you think can't fight back." The silver-bearded Guardian glanced at Derek, a flicker of pride in his expression. Turning back to the bikers, he said, "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to this man properly. Then you're going to leave, and you're not going to pull this kind of stunt again. Ever. Do I make myself clear?" The leader of the bikers opened his mouth to argue, but the steady, unflinching gaze of the Guardian stopped him cold. He hesitated, then muttered, Yeah, okay. We're sorry." Derek raised an eyebrow. "That didn't sound like you meant it." The Guardian leader leaned in, his voice dropping just enough to make the other man stiffen. "You'd better mean it." The apology came again, this time louder and clearer. "We're sorry," the leader said, glancing at Derek, then at the ground. The others mumbled their own half-hearted apologies, their bravado now completely gone. Derek nodded once. "Apology accepted. But remember, you don't get a second chance to fix this kind of mistake." As the bikers scrambled back to their motorcycles, the Guardians stayed put, watching silently until the group sped off. Their earlier arrogance was replaced by haste and humiliation. The parking lot grew quiet again, the tension finally lifting. Derek turned to the silver-bearded man and extended a hand. "Thank you," he said simply. The man clasped Derek's hand firmly. "Any time, brother. You're not alone. Remember that." The convoy began to mount their bikes, the rumble of their engines filling the air once more. But this time, it wasn't a sound of fear. It was solidarity. A reminder that strength comes in numbers, and that standing up to injustice always matters. As the last of the Guardians revved their engines and rolled out of the parking lot, Derek took a slow breath, the weight of the past few minutes lifting from his shoulders. He could still hear the faint hum of their bikes in the distance, a sound that now carried with it a sense of triumph rather than intimidation. The diner, which had been so quiet moments ago, was now filled with a new energy as patrons inside, who had been watching from the windows, began to return to their meals, exchanging whispered conversations. Derek rolled toward the diner door, his movements unhurried. He had dealt with worse in his life, and today had just been another reminder that standing firm in the face of hate and cruelty would always be the right choice. Inside, the waitress, a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair, gave him a soft smile as he entered. "Everything okay out there?" she asked, her eyes scanning him for any signs of distress. Derek returned her smile, his tone warm. "Yeah, everything's fine now, just had a little misunderstanding." She raised an eyebrow, but didn't press him further. "Good to hear. Your usual?" he replied as he sat down at his usual booth. "Please." Derek couldn't help but reflect on the brief encounter. The bikers had thought they could intimidate him, that they could take advantage of his disability, but they hadn't counted on one thing. Derek wasn't just a man in a wheelchair. He was part of a larger community, one that wouldn't hesitate to stand by him when the need arose. The silver-bearded Guardian had been right. It wasn't just about the apology. It was about the message, about showing that there was power in unity, and that even in the face of intimidation, one person could make a difference. Derek had stood firm, and in doing so he had reminded those around him that real strength doesn't come from how much you can physically endure, but from your ability to remain true to who you are, no matter the situation. It was a lesson not just for the bikers, but for everyone watching. No one, no matter their background or their circumstances, should ever be underestimated. And in the end, kindness and respect always outweigh fear and cruelty. As the waitress brought his coffee, Derek took a sip, feeling the warmth of it spread through him. For the first time that day, he felt a sense of peace. He had won, not because he had to fight, but because he had stayed true to himself, and in doing so, he had inspired others to do the same.